Extreme Machines, written by Christopher Maynard. On land. Endeavour holds the world's land speed record for the fastest truck. In 1993, it zipped along at a staggering 363 kilometers per hour, 226 miles per hour. On the sea. Offshore powerboats race along more than 3 times faster than a car is allowed to travel on the motorway. An extreme machine. Most of the cars, boats and planes we travel in these days are reliable and safe. Most of them are perhaps a little ordinary too, because we see them every day. But there are lots of odd-looking machines that only exist to do something fantastic. They go ridiculously fast or fly incredibly high. They are extreme machines. Most people would love to have a chance to see them close up, or, even better, ride in them. In this book, you'll find out what some of the weirdest machines on Earth can do. You'll also find out how they work, and how people risk their lives trying to take them to extremes. In the air. The space shuttle is built to make many trips into space. Its cargo bay is so big it could hide a small whale. Ray power. Solar cars are powered by the sun's rays, not by petrol or diesel. This car, the Mad Dog, can reach more than 70 kilometers per hour, 40 miles per hour, but not on cloudy days. No treads. Slick tires have no treads or grooves. Treads in car tires let rainwater out so the car doesn't skid. Drag car racing. The 2 drivers sat in their drag cars waiting for the next 400-meter, quarter-mile race. They watched an assistant splash water over both sets of rear tires or slicks. The fat slicks were now slippery as the drivers locked their front brakes and revved their gleaming engines. With a roar that set the packed stadium cheering, the slicks began to spin. Clouds of smoke rose behind the drag cars. In seconds, the rubber slicks turned soft with heat. It gave them a grip on the track that was as sticky as a leech's. There would be no unwanted wheel spin and wasted seconds when the race began, no matter how fast the drivers set off. Each driver now popped his gear stick into first and gripped the handbrake to hold his car back. Each man felt the engines begin to tug. Before them was a Christmas tree of lights, stacked one above another on a pole. The cars were ready to spring forwards the instant the lights changed. Best ever. The fastest recorded drag car took only 5.63 seconds over a 400-meter, 0.25-mile track, 6 times faster than a racehorse. Slow car? A Ferrari can reach 100 kilometers per hour, 60 miles per hour, in about 5 seconds. Drag racers do it in just 2. Safety first. A drag car driver wears a fireproof suit, a crash helmet, and a neck brace to help prevent injury. Drag racers are often fitted with a parachute to help them stop. It is kept in a small compartment behind the driver's seat. One of the Christmas tree's lights winked on, then another. A third flashed green and the 2 cars rocketed forwards. Blink and you would miss the race. Less than 8 seconds later, the cars screamed past the finish line. Having reached 240 kilometers per hour, 150 miles per hour, they were traveling well over twice as fast as a car on a motorway. The drivers released parachutes to help slow the cars. The race was so close that it was hard for the excited crowd to see which car had come first. Fortunately, the electronic timer caught it all. The winner, in the left-hand lane, was 0.07 of a second faster. The drivers steered over to the road that led the loser from the racing lanes and the winner to his next race. Both drivers were handed a small ticket that noted the time of their run and their final speed. For the rest of the day, the winning car beat every competitor it met. After 2 hours, the driver had won 7 races. He had been racing for less than a minute in all. Not so quick. Drag bikes are slower than drag cars. They have to be to avoid rearing up and doing wheelies. That would slow them down even more. Slower still. Drag trucks are even slower than drag bikes. Because of their size, they take twice as long as a drag car to tear down a 400-metre, 0.25-mile strip. Getting dizzy. Le Mans cars follow a circuit that is about 12 kilometres, 8 miles long. They'll lap the circuit some 350 times during the race. Running start. Drivers used to start Le Mans by running across the track and jumping into their cars. This no longer happens, as it is very dangerous. Le Mans. One of the world's most famous endurance races is held every year close to Le Mans, a town in France. The town comes alive each May and June when dozens of powerful cars and thousands of excited spectators arrive. The cars have come to take part in a grueling 24-hour race around a long circuit near the town. It's fast, it's tiring, and it's thrilling. In fact, although they only drive round a 12-kilometre, 8-mile circuit, by the end of Le Mans, the cars have covered almost 4,800 kilometres, 3,000 miles. It's the same as crossing America and then coming more than a third of the way back. On the day of the race, 70 to 80 cars pull away from the starting line. It's an incredible sight. Round and round the cars roar, circling the course in the time it takes to soft-boil an egg. Each car has a team of 3 drivers who change places after 15 circuits. That's just over an hour of driving each time. The drivers need to stay as fresh as possible. If they get tired, it's easy to crash. That's why all Le Mans cars must have a towing eye on the front and back. The eye is used to tow them off the track if they crash. Wet or dry. Grooved tyres are used if it rains, smooth slicks if it's dry. Used once. Windscreens usually last 1 race only. They are badly damaged in the 24 hours. Low equals fast. Le Mans cars are low, at just over 1 metre, 3 feet high, and wide. This helps them to hug the track, even at high speeds. Quick change. A Le Mans car can be jacked up in seconds, raising the car 15 centimetres, 6 inches. Each wheel is held on with just 1 nut. Tyres are changed in the time it takes to tie a shoelace. Who's that? Racing machines always have numbers, so they can be easily identified. The best place to watch Le Mans is from the grandstands close to the pits, the areas where the cars are serviced. Cars regularly limp into the pits, thirsty for fuel and urgently needing a new set of tyres. Mechanics swarm round a car like bees the moment it rolls to a stop. Each mechanic has a small task that has been repeatedly rehearsed. Within seconds, the car is refueled, fitted with fresh tyres, and speeding away. The pits are busy, not only with cars, resting drivers and mechanics, but also with photographers and reporters. Behind the pits, each team has a huge garage with mountains of spare parts for the cars. Drivers have to be careful when they leave the pits. Cold tyres don't grip as well as hot, and the cars may skid if they pull away too fast. It's a tricky race. That's why, in 1998, of the 73 cars that left the starting line, only 23 managed to finish. Tough truck. This truck competed in an endurance race called the Baja 1000. This race covers 1,000 kilometers, 620 miles in Mexico, over rocky and sandy ground. Engine power. Le Mans cars are fitted with engines that have 4 times the muscle of ordinary cars. Most engines are positioned behind the driver, not in front as in a family car. Fast track. Thrust SSC is designed to cut through the air as neatly as possible. It is long and thin, and it hugs the ground. This aerodynamic shape helps it to go faster. Thrust SSC. Thrust SSC, the initials stand for supersonic car, was built to take the world land speed record. It was also the first car to go supersonic, or faster than the speed of sound. Sound travels at about 1,224 kilometers per hour, 760 miles per hour. But the team of people who built the car almost didn't make an attempt at the speed record. The car was built in Britain, but it needed a long, flat stretch of ground to attempt a speed trial. Nowhere in Britain was suitable. However, Black Rock Desert in Nevada, USA was ideal. The desert is long and its surface is smooth. The problem was that the team couldn't afford to buy fuel for the aeroplane they needed to fly the car over. Then someone suggested they ask people to donate money to buy 114-litre, 25-gallon amounts of jet fuel. After an appeal on the internet and publicity in newspapers, money began to pour in. The team soon had what they needed. They were set to go for the record. Slow start. The first land speed record was set in 1898 by Gaston de Chasseloup-Laubat. His final speed was 63 kilometers per hour, 39 miles per hour. Today, a bicycle racer beats this. Old record. The previous land speed record holder, Thrust 2, took the record in 1983 at 1,018 kilometers per hour, 633 miles per hour. A speedy truck? Endeavour holds the truck land speed record. Thrust SSC is still more than 3 times faster. A speedy car? The McLaren F1, the fastest street-legal car in the world, can reach 370 kilometers per hour, 230 miles per hour. That's less than a third as fast as the SSC. October 15th, 1997 was a perfect autumn day. It was perfect weather too for trying to set a new speed record. As Andy Green, driver of the SSC, eased open the throttle, the giant black car began to roll. It moved slowly at first, so its jets didn't inhale desert dust. As it picked up speed, the afterburners began to blaze and poke their 12-meter, 40-feet-long tongues of flame out behind the engines. It was an amazing sight. The driver sat so low he could only see 3 kilometers, 2 miles ahead. To keep on course, he followed a white line of gypsum powder the team had sprinkled on the desert floor. Halfway along the track was a measured 1.6 kilometer, 1 mile. By the time the car got there, it was traveling at 1,228 kilometers per hour, 763 miles per hour. That's slightly faster than the speed of sound. It zipped through in under 5 seconds. Onlookers saw the 10-ton jet car slip past as steady as a train, chased by a 90-meter, 300-foot-wide carpet of desert dust lifted by the trailing shockwave. A few seconds later, the double crack of Thrust's 2 jet engines breaking the sound barrier split the air. 2 minutes after it set off, the car came to a stop. It was 20 kilometers, 13 miles from where it started. Thrust SSC was the proud owner of a new world record. A speedy plane? A 747 crew flying overhead at the right moment would have been shocked to see thrust SSC moving faster than it was flying. Catching up. Thrust SSC broke the sound barrier on the ground exactly 50 years after the first plane, the X-1, did so in the air. Fastest person. The fastest person in the world can run 100 meters, 110 yards, in just under 10 seconds. That's about 38 kilometers per hour, 24 miles per hour. Think tiny. Enlarged here, the world's tiniest car is the size of a match head. It is a working model of a 1936 Toyota, but it's 1,000 times smaller. Think bigger. One of the smallest cars you may spot is the Smart from Daimler-Benz. 2 will fit into a normal-sized parking space. Stretch limousine. The first thing the lottery winner did with his prize was to buy the best Cadillac he could. Then he told friends he was going to cut it in half. He wanted a stretch limousine, and that is how they are made. The car was sent to a special limo building factory. The owner asked for a 120-inch super stretch limo. That meant the factory would split the car and lengthen the body by 120 inches, or 3 meters, 10 feet. The cutters sliced the car as easily as a knife cuts into butter. In went long steel rails and new side panels. Then the car's interior was designed. A partition divided the chauffeur and passenger compartments. It had an electric window that slid up and down. Big, soft leather seats were also fitted. 10 people could now sit in the car. With a refrigerator, a telephone, a TV and a video, the finished interior looked nothing like a normal car. With a short stretch of the imagination, it reminded the owner of a luxurious yacht, but instead of a hull, it had wheels. All jazzed up. Limousines are usually luxuriously fitted inside. Neon lights and painted ceilings add to the glamour. How long? You could park 6 large family cars alongside the world's longest stretch limousine. Getting dark. There is no light 900 meters, 3,000 feet below sea level. Submersibles depend on powerful lights if they are going deeper. Going down. Scuba divers can dive to 50 meters, 160 feet. In an atmospheric diving suit, a diver can go to 10 times that depth. Deep sea submersible. 2 scientists and a pilot climbed down into Alvin, a deep-sea submersible. The hatches clanged shut. Then a crane lifted the little craft over the ship's side and gently set it down on the waves. Once in the water, Alvin is stable enough for a person to stand on its top. The 7-meter, 22-foot-long diving vessel bobbed on the swell and then dipped underwater. Now it moved more like a spaceship than a seagoing ship as it gracefully began to sink. Its journey would take it down almost 4 kilometers, 2.5 miles, into the inky black ocean depths. The descent would take over 2 hours. Alvin's crew was glad to be wearing thermal underwear and heavy jumpers. The water outside was icy cold, and that affected the temperature inside. As they huddled in the tiny cabin, only one light was kept on to save power. It was eerily quiet, though the crew did keep in regular contact with the ship above through a cordless telephone. As it neared the sea floor, Alvin halted and the pilot flipped on a bank of powerful lights. The crew peered out of Alvin's portholes. What would they see? Going deeper. In the deepest parts of the sea, water pressure is 1,000 times greater than at the surface. Normal submarines cannot go this deep. The pressure would flatten them. Deeper still. In 1966, a submersible called the Trieste set a world record by diving more than 11,000 meters, 36,000 feet. Staying down. Alvin can stay underwater up to 72 hours in an emergency. Skyscrapers of black rock loomed out of the dark. Nearby were the smoking hot water vents the scientists had come to study. Heated by volcanic rocks deep in the earth, water gushed out of the vents at temperatures hot enough to melt lead. Yet small plants and animals lived around the vents. The scientists hoped to learn more about their lives. The pilot brought Alvin closer. The machine's big robotic claw swung down to collect samples of the gushing water. The scientists knew this would stink like rotten eggs. Then Alvin moved away to settle on the seabed where the scientists could gather further samples. After 4 hours, the work was complete. The pilot released metal pellets from a tank to lighten Alvin's load, and the craft began the long 2-hour journey back to the surface. It had been a fascinating trip. Deep thoughts. Alvin can dive deeper than a whale. Trieste goes deeper still. What's that? This odd-looking racing machine is a swamp buggy. It is raced through muddy swamps in Florida. Swamp buggies were originally built as hunting machines. Offshore powerboats. Each year, from June to November, powerboat crews from all over Europe and the Middle East gather for a season of races. In open seas, they battle to win the World Championships of offshore powerboat racing. Offshore powerboats are huge. They weigh the same as 5 family cars and stretch a good 13 meters, 43 feet. Their massive twin hulls, called catamarans, are made out of 2 space-age materials, carbon fiber and Kevlar. The combination is lighter than steel, but a lot tougher. Into the hulls go 2 fighter plane cockpits, one for the driver and one for the throttle man. The 2 crew members are strapped into their seats for safety. Both wear life jackets and crash helmets, and each has an air supply. They talk to each other and to team members on shore through intercoms in their helmets. The intercoms are vital pieces of equipment. Once a race begins, the roar of the engines means the crew cannot hear each other without them. Skirted boats. Tiny hovercraft race at 135 kilometers per hour, 85 miles per hour, every year at World Championships in France. They follow a water and wet grass circuit. 1 or 2. Offshore powerboats used to have single hulls and open cockpits. Today's twin-hulled boats, with their closed canopies, are much safer. Thin and fast. Cigarette boats have won more races than any other boats. They have twin 500-horsepower engines. They were originally used to smuggle cigarettes between the Bahamas and Florida. Boats jostle for position when a race begins, narrowly avoiding hitting each other. The racecourse is marked with anchored floats called buoys. The boats have to maneuver round them. Inside each boat, the driver begins checking the navigation system and compass to stay on course. The throttle man watches the wind and waves, trying to guess what the boat will do next. Running into the wind can speed a boat up, as it lifts the hull out of the water. However, if the boat rises off the top of a wave to fly through the air, the throttle is hauled back. This stops the propeller from spinning too fast and braking. The throttleman's adjustments can mean the extra kilometre, mile per hour, that will win the race. But at speeds of 240 kilometres per hour, 150 miles per hour, his moves have to be instant. Slow down. Choppy seas can slow a powerboat by 80 kilometers per hour, 50 miles per hour, or more. Jet boats. In New Zealand, small jet boats are raced up shallow rivers. They have no propeller to catch on the riverbed. Formula One boats. These racing boats are fast and furious. They seat one person, and like offshore powerboats are twin-hulled. They can accelerate from 0 to 160 kilometers per hour, 100 miles per hour in 5 seconds. Speed record. The Spirit of Australia was a hydroplane driven by Ken Warby. In 1978, it set a world speed record on water of 514 kilometers per hour, 317 miles per hour. Bottled air. Hydroplane drivers carry 45 minutes worth of oxygen in case they capsize. Hydroplane racing. Hydroplane racing is the fastest and most dangerous of all water sports. On a 4-kilometer, 2.5-mile course, the boats shoot down the straight stretches at 320 kilometers per hour, 200 miles per hour, and take corners at 250 kilometers per hour, 160 miles per hour. It's thrilling to watch. The hulls barely touch the water. Hydroplanes basically travel on a cushion of air, but the boats shake violently, pounding over the surface of the water like hammers. The violent motion can temporarily blur the driver's eyesight. Yet, over a 20-minute race, drivers must tweak the controls to keep their boat as high out of the water as possible. At the same time, they try to overtake other hydroplanes. That's not as easy as it sounds. A boat that overtakes must not cut in front of the other boat until it is more than 5 boat lengths ahead. That's because each boat creates a huge rooster tail of spray that flings a ton of water into the air. If this is pelted down in the path of a following boat, it would flood the cushion of air the boat was riding on. When this happens, it forces the following boat up and over in a spectacular somersault. Power crazy. A hydroplane is ridiculously powerful. Its engine is actually 4 times more powerful than a Formula One car engine. No protection. Hydroplanes used to have open cockpits, but increasing speeds led to more accidents, and today's drivers sit in sealed cockpits. A way out. Hydroplanes are fitted with 2 escape hatches. One is in the front, and one is underneath the boat, located in the hull. Speed King. Hydroplanes, like drag cars, can race over 400-meter, 0.25-mile lengths. The Spirit of Texas set a record of 5.5 seconds. A hydroplane is cleverly designed, with a double front hull but a single rear hull. As it picks up speed, its 2 front hulls become airborne. This means it doesn't have a huge weight of water to move aside. With only the back hull and propeller dragging in the water, most of its power turns straight into speed. The secret of hydroplane racing, though, is what the boats use to push themselves along with. They're fitted with a giant helicopter engine. The engine is fine-tuned to produce an incredible 4,200 horsepower. That's enough power to run 42 good-sized family cars. The engine does its job, but the speed puts lives in danger. In the past, hydroplaning has killed many drivers. That's why today's drivers sit cocooned in a sealed cockpit, fitted with escape hatches and an oxygen supply. Accidents still happen with these speed monsters, but nowadays drivers usually survive. Strange brew. Many hydroplane engines run on alcohol, gas, or other strange brews of fuel. These give more power than the petrol or diesel we use for cars. Next in line. After the Mi-26, the next biggest helicopter is the Chinook. Its freight hold is a third as big as the Mi-26's. Smallest of all. There's only room for one in the world's smallest helicopter. In fact, it only weighs as much as a small adult. Mi-26 helicopter. The twin engines coughed and belched smoke as one of the world's largest helicopters, Russia's Mi-26, started up. The noise was tremendous. Moments later, the helicopter's 8 rotor blades began to whisk the air, stirring up the dust beneath. They gathered speed and merged into a whirring disk that was wide enough to park 10 lanes of cars beneath it. At last, with a great clatter, the mammoth helicopter shrugged once and heaved itself into the air. It was on an emergency mission in the Ural Mountains of Russia, where a series of forest fires raged. The fires had already charred huge areas of forest. They were now nearing roads and villages. The 5-man crew of the Mi-26 had scrambled into the air minutes after the call came through. Their job was to ferry firefighters to the scene of the blaze. That's why 78 firefighters were now crammed together on the helicopter's cargo deck. Each was fitted out with a parachute and a large pack of firefighting equipment. They were ready for the drop and the task ahead of them. Power pack. The Mi-26's twin engines are 60 times as powerful as a truck's engine. Tanked up. The Mi-26's fuel tanks could power a family car halfway round the world. They can take the Mi-26 480 kilometers, 300 miles. As they reached the fires, the helicopter crew could see a wall of smoke. They could not see through it, but several kilometers, miles west of the smoke line, the pilots spotted a winding logging road. This was their drop zone. The tree-lined road was too narrow to set the Mi-26 down, so the pilot hovered at about 450 meters, 1,500 feet, while the crew lowered the cargo deck's rear hatch. In waves, the firefighters dived headlong out of the helicopter. Parachutes snapped open, and they drifted down onto the road. 10 minutes later, all 78 men were safely on the ground, and the crew were raising the hatch. The giant helicopter dipped its nose and headed back to base to collect more firefighters. 60 years ago. In 1939, a Russian engineer named Sikorsky, living in the USA, built the first working single-rotor helicopter. 1,500 years ago. The idea behind a helicopter is more than 1,500 years old. Back then, the Chinese had a toy called a flying top that used feathered rotors to fly. Back and forth. A helicopter's rotor blades tilt in 2 directions, so a helicopter can fly forwards and backwards. Space gear. The pilots of the X-15 wore the same spacesuits as the astronauts who first flew into space. How many? 3 X-15s made a total of 199 flights over a period of 9 years. The last flight took place in 1968. The X-15. The giant B-52 bomber rumbled down the runway and lifted off. It carried no bombs. Instead, a small black dart was tucked under its right wing like a rolled-up newspaper. The dart was an X-15, a U.S. Air Force experiment to see if it was possible to fly an occupied plane into space. By hitching a ride on the B-52, the X-15 halved the fuel it needed to get airborne. It carried 1 pilot and was basically a flying fuel tank. It had stubby wings on its sides and a rocket engine on its back. The X-15 was the 15th in a line of experimental aircraft that began with the X-1. The original goal of these planes was to go higher than 30 kilometers, 19 miles, and faster than 3 times the speed of sound. The X-15 achieved this and more. It was the first plane ever to fly into space, and it broke all records for being the highest, fastest, and most dangerous way to fly. Suddenly, the X-15 left the B-52. Its engine fired, and it climbed straight up as if aiming to punch a hole in the sky. By the time it reached 60 kilometers, 37 miles, there was so little air left that its wings had nothing to bite into anymore. X-1. The X-1 was the first plane to fly faster than the speed of sound. Wrong engine. If the X-15 had been fitted with a jet engine, it would have spluttered and died long before reaching space. A jet engine needs air, and there is no air in space. The X-15 had skids instead of rear wheels. Low flyers. High-flying passenger jets cruise around the world at a height of about 12 kilometers, 7.5 miles. The X-15 went 9 times higher. The X-15 now used a dozen tiny rockets to steer itself. Up and up it climbed. By the time it was out of fuel, it was more than 100 kilometers, 67 miles up. The pilot could see the curve of the planet and look down on the atmosphere. There is no clear line where atmosphere ends and space begins. Most people in space exploration agree that it happens at about 80 kilometers, 50 miles up. That's why this pilot and half his colleagues earned themselves the right to wear astronaut wings. For at the top of its flight, the X-15 was traveling like a spaceship. By now, the X-15 was rocketing along at about 7,200 kilometers per hour, 4,500 miles per hour. That's just over 6 times the speed of sound. At normal motorway speeds, a car would have to travel non-stop for 3 days and nights to go as far as the X-15 would have done had it kept this up for an hour. Turning back to Earth, the plane glided down. It was a strange sight. To save weight, it had no rear wheels, only a pair of metal skids, a bit like gigantic skis. After landing, it simply skied along the ground until it stopped. The flight had taken just over 10 minutes. Hot stuff. At 6 times the speed of sound, the X-15's skin got very hot, reaching a scorching 650 degrees centigrade, 1,202 degrees Fahrenheit. It had a special metal surface to withstand this. Getting bigger. Even slower planes such as Concorde heat up in supersonic flight. Heat makes metal expand. Concorde's body swells 20 centimeters, 8 inches in flight. Earlier trips. Before the space shuttle, astronauts were sent into space in rockets. The giant Saturn V rockets were the largest and the most powerful launchers built. Saturn V. Speed record. In orbit, the shuttle flies 30 times faster than a jumbo jet. It would take 10 minutes to fly from Los Angeles to New York. Space shuttle. The crawler inched towards the launch pad. At its fastest, the world's largest transport machine could almost get up to walking speed. Now it was travelling at half that pace because of the load on its deck. The load was the space shuttle, the only plane that can ferry astronauts to and from space under its own power. The shuttle consists of an orbiter, which carries a crew of 7 astronauts, a giant fuel tank, and 2 skinny booster rockets. On this trip, the orbiter also carried a satellite to launch in space. 6 hours later, countdown reached 0. With a roar and a blinding glare, the shuttle shot up. 2 minutes later, the now empty booster rockets broke free. The main engines thundered on, draining the fuel tank at a speed that would empty a swimming pool in under 10 seconds. The emptied fuel tank soon dropped away. the orbiter glided gently into its path around Earth. The 7 astronauts were 300 kilometers, 190 miles up. Empties. When empty, the 2 booster rockets drop back to Earth. They are collected to be used again. A long reach. The shuttle's robotic arm is as long as 4 cars parked bumper to bumper. Space chair. Astronauts use a rocket-propelled armchair when they work outside the shuttle. In space, the astronauts and their equipment became weightless. It was fun, but they had a lot of work to do if they were to launch the satellite. 2 astronauts climbed into their spacesuits and entered the orbiter's whale-sized cargo bay. The enormous cargo bay doors swung open. The astronauts then used a long robotic arm to begin the process of launching the satellite. Checking and launching the satellite took 7 days. Then it was time to return to Earth. Strapped back into their seats, the astronauts heard the puff of the steering rockets. Then the main engine fired. Its power would take the craft out of orbit and return it to Earth. When the orbiter hit Earth's atmosphere, it started to buck and plunge. Meanwhile, the craft blazed red with the heat of dropping through the air at thousands of kilometers, miles an hour. Special ceramic tiles stopped it from melting. The orbiter no longer needed its engines. It returned to Earth as a glider, making a neat runway landing. Space station. Countries with space programs are planning a jointly run space station in Earth's orbit. Its permanent crew will show that humans can live in space. Life on board. In space, the orbiter's 7 crew members live in a section at the front of the shuttle. The rest of the craft is a cargo bay and the massive engines. No fuel tank. People who make new machines try to find ways to save power. This solar-powered car runs on energy from the sun. Speak to me. The EVOC has an on-board voice-controlled computer. It helps the driver to travel safely. Ideas for the future. Ideas for machines of the future may sound odd, but imagine how weird a space shuttle would have seemed to people 100 years ago. The Cadillac EVOC is a luxury sports car of the future. If you are ever offered a ride in one, don't reach for the door handles. There are none. The car opens by remote control. The car can also see in the dark. A camera picks up the body heat of people and animals well beyond the beam of the headlights. Their image appears on the windscreen, warning drivers to steer clear. The car can detect anything behind it in the same way. The EVOC is a smart car. On water, the little flare craft L325 is a boat dressed up like a plane. Known as a wingship, it has a pair of stubby wings, an aeroplane's tail, and a small propeller above the roof. As the 9-meter, 31-foot-long craft speeds up, its wings create a cushion of high-pressure air on the water's surface. The cushion is strong enough to lift the 5-passenger wingship into the air, where it speeds along at 120 kilometers per hour, 75 miles per hour. It's much faster than a boat because the water isn't dragging it back, yet it can't rise up more than the height of an adult. That's why the wingship will never be anything but a boat. The moment it tries to fly higher, the air cushion vanishes and the craft splashes down. Water flight. As the flare craft speeds up, it rises in the water. At 80 kilometers per hour, 50 miles per hour, it takes off and cruises just above the water's surface. What's that? This design for a car shows how unusual some ideas for new machines can look. It's called the Slug. Speed monsters. Supersonic planes of the future will be more than twice as long as Concorde. Space rescue. This is a suggested rescue craft for ferrying people back from an international space station if it should ever be needed. There are exciting plans for future air travel as well. Designers are hard at work on a 300-seat jet aeroplane that flies at 2,400 kilometers per hour, 1,500 miles per hour. That's over twice the speed of sound. The plane will travel from the US to Japan in 4 hours. Right now, the trip between the two countries takes twice as long. As the plane will travel faster than a bullet, its nose and wing edges will heat to temperatures hot enough to bake a cake. That's a problem for a plane. It will have to be made of metals that can take repeated heating and cooling without weakening. If a metal weakens, it can fracture. There's another problem. An aeroplane that breaks the speed of sound, or a supersonic aeroplane, has to have a long pointed nose. But it's difficult for pilots to see past the nose when they land and take off. Concorde solves this problem with a nose that lifts and droops, but it's heavy. The new plane will have no front windows. Instead, there will be a big display in the cockpit showing what's ahead. The possibilities for machines of the future are fascinating. Here is one unusual design for a futuristic space transporter. What do you think extreme machines will look like? Space travel. Many people dream about space travel, and there are incredible plans for all sorts of spacecraft. Some of these ideas will never be more than models. Others may eventually take off. Glossary. Aerodynamic. The smooth, streamlined shape that helps a car or aeroplane to slip through air easily. Circuit. A set course round which machines can race. Drag racer. The name given to cars and motorbikes which race short distances, usually 400 meters, in a straight line. Endurance race. A race run over a long distance which takes a long time. Driving skill and a reliable engine are more important than speed. Fuel. The material that powers an engine to make it go. Gears. These control the speed of an engine. Glider. Any aeroplane that doesn't have an engine to drive it is a glider. When the space shuttle runs out of fuel to power its engine, it becomes a glider. It glides back down to Earth. Grandstand. A seating area for a crowd watching a sporting event. Horsepower. A means of measuring an engine's power. Hull. The part of a boat that sits in the water. Hydroplane. A fast motorboat that skims over the water with most of its hull in the air. At speed, the flat shape of the hull planes across the surface, rather than cutting through the water. Hydroplanes are the fastest racing boats. Jet engine. All engines run on two things: fuel and oxygen. Jet engines gulp their oxygen from air. Land speed record. The fastest speed set by a vehicle on land. The record has been broken many times. It is now faster than the speed of sound. Rocket engine. A rocket engine carries the oxygen it needs in a tank in a special substance called an oxidizer. See also jet engine. Rotors. The whirling blades above a helicopter are known as rotors because of the way they spin. Each rotor is a mini wing that lifts as it rotates. Shockwave. Anything going faster than the speed of sound creates a shockwave in the air. We hear it as a loud bang. It can shatter glass at close range. If you could see it, it would look a bit like the front or bow wave that big, fast-moving ships create. Space shuttle. The space shuttle is made up of an orbiter, 2 booster rockets and a fuel tank. The orbiter can return to space again and again. Speed of sound. Sound moves very much slower than light. That's why you see lightning before you hear it. At ground level, where air is thickest, sound travels at about 1,224 kilometers per hour. Submersible. A submarine cruises underwater as well as diving and climbing. A submersible mainly just dives and climbs. Submersibles are carried to a new site by a mothership and then lowered over the side. Throttle. The control handle or pedal that feeds fuel to an engine. As it is opened, more fuel is pumped in and the engine speeds up. To slow down, the throttle has to be closed.